Okay, part 5, this is the final bit. In the previous steps we basically got to here, which is we've stripped out all the semantic, stripped out all the excess HTML, taken out the CSS, reintroduced a CSS style, put some widths in, floated the items, so we've got our 3-column layout. What we really need to do next is style each of the individual areas that we have. So we got to 6.3. So we're going to use the CSS box model, of course, and just a reminder of the CSS box model. We have a content, and you can visualize that as being what's inside the box. Around that there's the padding area, the bubble wrap, and then we have the cardboard box itself, which is the border. The width of a box is indicated by the width of the content. So if you're doing precise measurements, then you'd need to add on the padding and the border widths. It just depends on what it is you're attempting to style. When you place a box next to another box, we can affect how close they become by setting the margin. Now there are actually quite complex rules. There's a mathematical formula that's used to determine the actual margin calculation, so it's not quite as straightforward as just setting a value. But if you want to find out about that, you can look it up online. So let's work through the particular elements and see how they need to be styled. At the top we've got the branding box. Now I don't think we need anything to do anything with that, because all it is an image that's just laid right across the top of the page. Let's have a look at the column on the left. Well, our column on the left, we really need, I think it butts up a little bit too close to the banner. So what we could do is we need to sort of nudge that down a little bit, add a little bit of space, and in fact that's what's in the original design. So we could use marginal padding here. So I've decided that I'm going to put 6 pixels of padding at the top of the navigation area. Now similarly, looking at the original design, there's about the same amount of space between the column on the left and the central column. So I'm going to use 6 pixels at the top. I'll use 6 pixels between the navigation area and content main. And again, the top of content main, we'll want that to be aligned with the top of the menu. So I'm going to add 6 pixels at the top of content main. Over on the other side of the page, it's the same idea. I want the same kind of amount of space to sit between the central column and the column on the right. So that's going to be about 6 pixels there, and similarly 6 pixels at the top. So this is layout information, so it's going to go into the layout style file, and you can see you've got the width and the float information was there previously, and what I'm adding in is I'm adding some padding to the top and padding to the right. And if you work your way down, you can see what I've effectively done. It's just added padding right, top, left, padding top, left. With some of these, what I've done is I've split the padding between the two elements. So if I want to get 6 pixels of space, I've added 3 pixels to one element and 3 pixels to the other, and that would create this 6 overall. So this is what we had, and if we see what happens when we click refresh after those elements have been added in, we get that. Just spaces it out a little bit. So next up, style each individual area. So we're going to start off with the branding box, and again that's just got an image in it, so I don't think I really need to do anything with that. The navigation styling is more complex. This is a standard way to do navigation nowadays. We have a series of links, and what we can do with those links is we can actually turn them into a menu system just by following these steps. Now the first thing, of course, is that an anchor is an inline element, and if we want the anchors to appear on separate lines below each other, we'll need to change the nature of the way that it's actually displayed. So what we can do is we can go display block, and what that will do is that will lay out the anchor so that each anchor is laid out vertically inside the containing block. Now of course the containing block here is that div area that we set for the navigation. So each anchor is laid out below themselves like that, all the way down the div area, just by going display block. Next steps, well, hyperlinks of course have a line underneath them, and we don't have lines underneath the menu system in the original design, so we can turn that off. And there's an actual little thing that we can do in CSS. We can go text, decoration, none, and that will turn the lines off underneath. Then we can set some height and some padding on each of those elements, and you can see the column on the right actually shows the effect of having all of those, spaces them out, places them underneath each other. Now, we could apply this style to the anchors, but of course the trouble is what will happen is if we put this into our CSS file, it will actually style every single anchor on the site, when in fact what we really want is we just want to style the anchors that are inside the navigation area. So there is a way, there is a notation that we can use to actually only style elements that are in some other element. And the way that we can do that is we can use the name of an id and we can follow it by the actual sub-element that we're interested in styling. So if we want to style all the anchors that are inside the navigation area, this is the notation that we can use. We can go hash navigation, and that's the name of the id area that we're dealing with, and we have a space, and then we place the name of the HTML element after that, so that we can read that and it says this style will apply to the anchors which are inside the navigation area, and only those. Now there's no reason why you can't style all the anchors as well. You could do what you like, but here this style will only apply to the anchors which are inside the navigation area. And looking at what we want to do here, in fact these style rules need to be put into two separate files, because I feel that some of them to do with layout, and of course I think that text decoration none, that's actually typography, so I've placed it inside my typography.css file, whereas the other three rules go into my layout.css file. Now that gives us our clean, not underlined links, but of course in the original design we have the first item is in kind of bright blue background, then we've got a series of items with a white background, and then a series of items with a light blue background. And I've just come up with these names: home, upper menu, lower menu. Often there'll be some context. You look at the menu items, you go, yeah, I can see those are to do with the home site, those are to do with other links, something like that. But in this instance there isn't really any conceptual difference between the links that are on a white background and the links that are on a blue background. So it's very difficult to come up with a sensible naming strategy for these three different areas. So I've just called them home, upper menu and lower menu, and I'm kind of breaking the rule about coming up with semantic names for things. But in this instance there doesn't seem to be any kind of logic or reason as to why some are white and some are blue. I think they just did it that way because it looks pretty. Now of course our problem is that how can we style these different areas? At the moment they're all anchors, so we've got to have a choice here. We could go in and we could put divs in, and in fact that's what we did before when we wanted to mark out the logical areas of the page. So we could go div id equals, and that would be the top one, that would be the home. And then we could go div id equals, and then there would be a series of links, and then div id equals, and those would be the bottom links. But looking at that, and you could certainly do it this way, we'd have to add extra markup, but I'm slightly uncomfortable with it. It feels to me that we've lost the flow, the idea that these are a set of links. So rather than use a div and a named id, why not use a class instead? Now if you remember what classes enable you to apply a style to a series of things over and over again. Ids have to be unique, but classes can be used on lots and lots of different things. So if we do it this way, then what we can do is the first one we can say class equals home, and then the second set we can go class equals upper menu, and then that final set we can go class equals lower menu. So again, you have to go in, edit the HTML and add a little bit of HTML in there, but we haven't got any choice. It's the only way to do it really. It's the only way that we can really style these different parts. Once we've done that, we can go in and we can style the different parts, and again I can use a shortcut notation to indicate that I'm styling anchors in a particular part, and in fact I'm styling a class which is a particular anchor inside a particular part. So you can see hash navigation, that's the named area on the page. we're going to style anchors which are inside that particular named area, but in fact we're only going to style those anchors that have home as a class. That's that first set there, and then below that we've got a.upper menu and then a.lower menu. And I've just found the colours and the background colours by using a sampling tool that I found on the web, and that's given me those particular colours that are representing in hexadecimal. Remember to put the hash symbol in front. The other thing about these items is that some of them have a little dotted line that separates them, so again I can do that. I can just say set the border bottom to be a dotted line, and I can set the width. So you can see I've done that with the upper menu and the lower menu, just like that, to give us that little line that separates these items. So that's the column on the left. Next up, the table and the central part. Well, really with the heading, the sort of main area, the sort of welcome message, all I'm doing is adding a little bit of spacing and indicating that the text should be aligned on both sides. Okay, so I've got text align justify, and there's a little bit of spacing to do with adding the margin. And you can see that I've styled the H1 inside the content main, so it's that particular blue colour which is in the menu. Now the latest news thing, which sits just above the table, that's an H2, so again it's orange in the original design, so I go the H2 in the news area is going to be orange, and I've set it as a particular size, and I've set a little bit of margin space there. Now by making it in line, what will happen is that the little RSS icon will float up and it sits next to the latest news piece of text. So that just gives you that visual effect. Now for perhaps the hardest bit, which is this table, styling this table. We've got 3 columns here. There's an icon in the first column, and then there's a story which sits in the second column of the table, and then we've got the story date sitting in the third column of the table. Well, like the menu system that we had, the best way to style this is to use classes. So again, we're going to have to go back in and edit the file to add some classes in. So I've decided to use 3 names: icon, story and story date. And in red you can see how I've edited that. And I've added icon, story and story date as classes to each particular row. Once I've done that, then I can add some layout styles to do with editing the table data items that are identified by those names. So the way that we read that, we say these are the table data items which have a class name of icon in the central news area. Similarly then, I've got table data with the name of story and table data with the name of story date, and those are classes, so I can apply this style over and over again. And what I've effectively done is I've set the widths, added a bit of padding to make it look right. So that's the central column. Then we've got the column on the right, and the styling here is basically to do with adding a bit of space around things. So across the top we've got search, business and law, and in the original design that was white lettering on a blue background. So inside the sub column, the content sub column, I style the H1, add a bit of padding, add a background colour into the colour.css file. The badges, I align them in the centre, and again I space them out a little bit by putting a bit of margin at the top, just 20 pixels of margin top there, just to space them out so they float down the column nicely. Now across the bottom we've got those 3 links in the site info box at the bottom. So we simply go text align centre, and what that does is that lays them all out in the middle of the page like that. So we're nearly there. That's not bad. The final step is overall tidying. Now it's difficult for me to show you this here, but what basically happens is that when this page is brought up in a browser, what it does is it sits in the centre of the browser window. So when the browser window is dragged and made wider, This sits right in the middle of the browser, and it sits at this particular width. It doesn't get any wider, it just sits there. Now there's a technique we can do this, it's a bit hacky, but this is how it's done. What we basically do is we set all the text in the document to be centered, so we go HTML text align center, which effectively does that. But of course what it does is it sets everything to be centered. And we want all the content that's inside the red box to be centered back on the left. So what we can do is we add the HTML text align part, and then we can add some style information to the body, and we can set the width, the margin, and we can say text align left. And what will happen is it does this. So what we've effectively done is we move the whole of the HTML to the center, and of course that cascades down into everything, all the different elements that we have, and then we say, but actually, in fact, for the body, we center everything on the left, and that puts us back where we were. The only other thing that this site actually has, which is a little bit difficult to see, is that there's actually a tiny little border right around the edge of the content. And so the way to do that is to add another id element called content. Once we've done that, we can style it. So again, we have to go back into the HTML and just add a huge content block that contains everything else, div id equals content. And then down the bottom, you can see inside the layout.css file, we add something that just gives us that little coloured frame. And that was what was in the original design, so I've tried to recreate that. You can see I've set the border top, right and left style solid, just giving it a colour and a little bit of width there. And so that's what we've got. That's the original design. So that was one that was incredibly messy, and this is what we've got now. And I think that's quite close. Not bad at all. That's the original, and that's our good version with semantic XHTML and all the style in separate style files. Now the advantage of this, of course, is that our new version, we've got separate files, our content is readable, it's much, much shorter. By doing the XHTML and the CSS properly, we've massively reduced the size of the page, and because it's readable and much, much shorter, it's maintainable. Going back to that original page and deciding that you wanted to move some of the elements around would just be impossible. The other thing, of course, about our site is that it's standards compliant. So we know that that site will look exactly the same, or nearly exactly the same, in whatever browser you bring it up in. The original version wasn't standards compliant. The other advantage of doing this, of course, is that if we wanted to take that content and use it for something else, like printing it out or displaying it on a big page, then we could simply change those style files and we would have to do very little to the original HTML.